Justin, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate you coming on and really interested to hear about what you have to say, because you're a man in the Western world that practices a lot of Eastern things and ties it all together, looks at things from a macroscopic and microscopic way, and I love that. But just to give a little bit of background and hear a little bit of your story, how'd you get into all this? How'd you become classically trained in Chinese medicine? What led you into all this?
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm happy to be here. So, and yeah, I practice Chinese medicine with a Daoist slant. And, I got into Chinese medicine, interested in this sort of cultivational journey. I just found the idea of improving oneself very fascinating. And it seemed as though that had been, deeply explored in the East. And I started in martial arts. So I sort of began in this sort of physical realm of things, of just learning to use my body in different ways with breathing exercises and physical exercises. But then also got exposed to meditation and the concept of right, wrong, good, bad, appropriate, inappropriate, sort of duality concepts. And it made sense to me. It just really kind of drew me in. And I didn't conceive of pursuing it as a career. I worked as a translator for a number of years, worked in business, hated sitting behind a desk all day. And I was reading a book on Chinese medicine because I was interested in it. And a friend of mine was just like, why don't you go to school for Chinese medicine? And it was like somebody had smacked me upside the head. And I just realized like, oh, duh, that's what I should be doing. And so I worked for a little longer to save up some money, went back to grad school, and just really haven't looked back. And then there is the sort of modern TCM, which is what is most acupuncture. It's called traditional Chinese medicine, although TCM is really post-Mao. So it's not traditional. It's post-communist revolution synthesized Chinese medicine, where Mao brought many of the best doctors together from around the country, looked to see commonalities and understandings of the medicine, and then synthesized a standard for the entire country from that, getting rid of a lot and keeping a certain amount.
So it's really modernized traditional medicine in a way, right?
Exactly. It is very much so. And his model in that was Western medicine. So everything is described in these sort of quasi-biomedical terminology, which is not the language of classical Chinese medicine, which would have been usually considered, let's say, pre-Song dynasty or is really like, basically the Chinese medicine has gone through iterations because it is so old. And what was practiced before the Song dynasty, which would be, let's say, roughly 900 to 1200 period, is different than what was practiced after it. And then it also went through other iterations as well with different schools of thought. But Mao basically took and created a new synthesis, which became TCM. And that's what I first learned. But then I got exposed to a Daoist teacher who is actually back in Manhattan or in Queens, and began studying with him and had access to more of the classical approach. And that really took me even deeper and resonated with me that much more. It was just that much richer in terms of how it looked at the integration of the physical journey, the emotional journey, the spiritual journey, and that whole experience was really sort of like just mind-opening of like, oh, this really makes sense. This really is kind of where human potentiality is at, and just drew me in. And rather than learning Daoism from the perspective of studying a religious text and doing religious rituals and doing all of these sort of formal things, I learned Daoism via the medicine. So I learned about Daoism via disease and the prevention of disease or the treatment of disease, rather than just learning how to burn incense and do chants or do that sort of stuff, which was really my interest. It was about the sort of human to human journey and how can we as humans be healthier physically, emotionally, spiritually. And that's the part of Daoism that just is like the nectar to me. It's the part that really kind of gets me fascinated in terms of the human journey.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I always understood, and I'm sure most people saw traditional or classical Chinese medicine as the whole sum of Chinese ancient, everything that came, acupuncture, understanding all of that was lumped together. And you're saying that's not really the case. It's westernized quite a bit. And there is a number of different types of approaches as far back as you could go, really, in Chinese medicine that would differ quite a bit. So from Daoism to TCM, what is the big differentiating factors that you would see if you went to a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner versus a Daoist practitioner?
Well, I mean, I think, one thing traditional Chinese medicine, the sort of modernized version, still does include a lot of classical stuff. But what the communists did is to really try to separate out the emotional component of things. They focused on things in terms of very somatic, cut and dry, leaving the psychology aside, or leaving the sort of, not just the psychology, because they did come up with treatments for anxiety, for depression, for those sorts of things. But the emotional journey of the human, as a human, that part was largely removed. And so it was very cut and dry, like this is a human having this experience of anxiety, but not the sort of deeper introspection of like, well, how did you get there? How did you become you to have anxiety? Because you and I might have been exposed to the same exact event, but we're going to experience it differently. And that facet of removing that is one of the bigger differences. It's sort of removing the psycho-spiritual journey of a human as a factor in medicine, where Daoism, you just can't remove it because that's what it's about.
Yeah, and it seems that that's a issue or a problem, I could say, across the board in medicine. Meaning, you look at conventional medicine, and there are a number of things and iterations to it as well, where we've gotten away further and further from that psycho-emotional, you as a spiritual being and just a body piece. So as we've modernized, we've kind of broken you down into pieces, specialized in this piece, and that's it. So it seems that, and that's not just conventional. If you look at westernized, I've even seen Ayurvedic practitioners that are modernizing and forgetting some pieces of the past.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem because we're losing this wisdom of thousands of years, right? And that's one of the biggest issues, I feel like, is that we're not looking at the human being as those three components that make us up: physical, emotional, and spiritual. And that's something you're doing as a practitioner, right? That's something you're pushing for and basically saying, this is real, this is integrated, whatever you want to call it, but this is healing.
Yeah. And I think on one level, if we lose the skills or the knowledge of the ancients, who cares? At a certain level, humans will refigure it out because we need to figure it out. And that's actually really more the issue. It's not that we're losing the wisdom of the ancients. It's that we're just not treating humans. Yes. We're treating machines. And that's really where the problem is at. Whatever the Daoists figured out or whatever the ancient yogis figured out, if we look at sort of modern functional medicine and sort of the cutting edge of Western medicine at this point, they're just starting to figure out a lot of the things that the ancients figured out about how these things are integrating. And they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing it because it's just necessary. That's the one thing with medicine, is that if you don't figure out the cause of the problem, people get sick and die. And if you're in medicine, we care. We want to help people. And so we see a problem and we want to find a solution to it. So it would be nice if we don't have to recreate the wheel, because the wheel has already been created. But I think the bigger picture is recognizing we need the wheel. We need to come back to figure out how to take the amazing stuff we've learned in the scientific process and then bring that back into integrating into all of the human experience. Because obviously Western science has figured out a lot of really, truly amazing things. There's no reason to throw that out It's just a matter of taking that information and reintegrating it into the whole of the person.
What do you think it is about our modern science industry of medicine that kind of shuns and looks back at ancient practices with a little bit of, may I say, arrogance, with a little bit of this dismissal that we know better than they did back then? Yet, I mean, you look at some of the things that people were able to do back then and predict and create with the ancient, pyramids and everything. You still can't do that almost. With modern day technology, we can't figure that out. And yet we look at them as almost, as an old ancestor, like old crazy grandpa, right? Don't listen to him. But he's full of knowledge.
Exactly. No, I think my answer to that would be on a slightly esoteric side in saying it goes back to Aristotle, which is a long ways back. But the logic that came from Greece was that something was A or it was not A. There was no inclusivity, that something is A and it is not A. And in the East, in the traditions of the ancients, even though Aristotle, of course, is quite ancient, it's context. It's only A once you have B to compare it to. And once you can compare B to C, maybe B becomes the A to C. It's like the glass of water is cool in comparison to the room, but the refrigerator is cool compared to the water, and the ice is cool compared to the refrigerator. It's only in context that you can judge something as being one thing or another. And in the West, we have this. We see this right now, of course, very painfully in America, but this sort of splitting of duality is you're either on this side of the fence or you're on that side of the fence. And it's either the ancients had no knowledge or they had all the knowledge. We can't really just say to ourselves, like, they actually had a lot of stuff figured out, and we also have a lot of stuff figured out. Why can't we have that duality where there is truth in both modern science and there is truth in the ancients? And I think there's this sort of either or mentality that is just really part of our culture. It's A or not A.
It really is. I feel like you can't find yourself in the gray. I always say that there's so much truth in that gray area, right? And all the shades of gray, but most of us find ourselves in black or white. It's right or wrong, and it's this way or it's that way, or science says this and not that. Whereas we know science changes every day.
Changes all the time. And yet somehow in the scientific method, which is, both my parents are PhDs and research scientists. So I grew up in that world of science and do the research, look at the data, see the data over time, enough data points. It doesn't lie. It gives you solid information. But there's always exceptions. And there's always confusion in reality. And if you look in the universe, we know that's the case. And there's just nothing in the universe that is absolute.
Right.
But yet we're always looking for the absolute truth. And I think we just to kind of set ourselves up for failure in that as we start to look for that. I found in Chinese medicine, people tend to be on one or two sides of the fence. They either don't believe in Chinese medicine. They think it's quackery. They think acupuncture is not real. It's all placebo. Herbal medicine isn't working. All placebo. Or they expect for it to be a miracle. I've had this disease for 20 years. It's very chronic. It's degenerative. I've tried all these other treatments. Nothing has worked. And I expect acupuncture in one treatment. And you're like, it's actually not that it's quackery. It's not that it's all placebo. And it's also not that I am like Jesus laying hands on you and thou shalt be healed. Like the human body is complex and the human condition complex. It's not just the human body, right? And the spirit, and looking for those absolutes, we kind of set ourselves up for failure rather than like looking at the process or the journey.
Right. And in the journey, you also realize that each of us are so individualized and so unique that we'll never say, well, their outcome was this. I want the same treatment and receive the same outcome. And I think that's a big problem because most of medicine does say that. You take this pill, we've clinically shown that it will help you, and end of story. Whereas people take the pill and they say it didn't work, and the doctor say, well, you must be crazy because we knew it would work, or else we'll just give you another stronger pill that showed that worked on the population of people like you. But there is no one like you, right? Do you think the ancients looked at that, understood the personalization maybe a little bit more?
They definitely did. It's actually one of the hallmark statements of Chinese medicine is you treat the person, not the disease. Mm-hmm. So when somebody comes to me and they have rheumatoid arthritis, or they have MS, or they have psoriatic arthritis, or they have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, I don't treat any of those things. I treat the person showing up that may have the symptom of Crohn's, or the symptom of RA, or the symptom of back, or the symptom of this, because what caused your back pain and what caused my back pain is going to be different. Maybe you were playing tennis and I was playing rugby, and, or you were playing rugby and I was playing badminton, or like whatever it was. I was knitting and I hurt my back, and, the mechanism of injury, the mechanism of the onset of disease is going to be different. So of course the treatment is going to have to be different.
Do you find it difficult to tell patients that and have them understand that? Because I know at our center, it is when you get that first call, it's either do you accept insurance is the first question, or right, or it's do you treat X disease, my diagnosis, and you try and explain it, and you only have a certain amount of time on the phone, and it's sort of like I feel like the eyes glaze over when you don't give a yes or no, and people are just like, well, do you or don't you?
Yeah, I know people really do look for that certainty. And over the years, I've come to answer that I've worked with this disease pattern quite a bit, and every person is unique. But I have worked with the disease.
Yeah. It's a very diplomatic answer, right?
Well, and I think legally, I'm not allowed to say I treat diseases.
Right.
For insurance model, I have to diagnose something, but I'm not allowed to treat it. It's a duality within our medical system that is so broken that you have to give a diagnosis, but you can't say you're treating it. And
I know, it's crazy. It really is. When you look at some of medicine and you see what you have to do and what you can't do, it's so contradictory. It's so like, who came up with this, guys? You're telling me I have to diagnose, but I can't treat that then. What's the point of all this, guys? Like, really?
In some of the acupuncture companies, they require a diagnosis, but they don't pay for a diagnosis. So you have to do the evaluation and come up with the diagnosis, but they don't justify paying for it, but they won't pay you for treatment if you don't do it.
Right. And again, this is something the ancients would probably scoff at and be like, what's the point? Again, so you even take a Socratic kind of, viewpoint of this and be like, why would we do this if this is the, and you'd come to the natural conclusion that we shouldn't do this, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's really, it's just common sense. There's not there's no justification for it other than it's a business model that doesn't have patient care at its highest priority. Basically.
Yeah, and complexity is actually works in everyone's favor. You need more people. You need the industry has to be there when it's this complex. Yeah. And the more complex it is, the more reliant you are on this industry. And so the whole circle of life goes on within it. Now, one thing I saw you said, I really liked that the ancients were the original biohackers. And I know a lot of biohackers out there, and maybe I think they would probably agree, but also some would dispute because so many are on the cusp of such technology-driven data and really pushing the boundaries of what's possible with genetics and everything that you may say has been a very 21st century advent. So tell me, why do you think the ancients were the original biohackers, and were they doing it smarter than our modern day biohackers are?
Well, okay. So one of my favorite sayings is, we want to preserve the fire of a tradition, not the ashes of a tradition. The ashes are the treatment tools, the treatment methods. The fire is the goal of treatment, the goal of the practice, the whole reason you came up with the tool. So we came up with a knife to be able to cut the body, to do surgery, and then we refined into multiple types of scalpels for different situations to make the cutting of the body more efficient as a surgical intervention. We kept the goal, be able to cut the body open and help somebody that needs surgery, but we didn't keep the ashes, the original rough stone that somebody used to cut the body. And the original biohackers were motivated to improve human function physically, emotionally, spiritually, and they came up with tools to help improve the body. Modern day biohackers are doing the same thing. What might be, I might argue, might be missed some of those cases would be the bigger picture of why they're doing the biohacking. It might be that they're looking only at one side of it. How do I hack my physical health? How do I live to be 130? How do I live to be 150? But without the bigger picture of how do I live to be happier, or how do I live to have a better connection to a transpersonal identity so that I am more in touch with the bigger sense of humanity or the planet or the universe or something like that, which was part of the sort of ancient method. And I would say they were more considerate of the bigger picture, but also went in to look at which herbs made you a better athlete, helped you to prevent aging, helped to prevent decline associated with aging, which we can then look at some of the modern herbs that has research around how it supports telomere health, how it supports as an antioxidant. And so we can see the ancients were doing the same things. They just didn't know that it was telomeres.
Right. Those words were different words, correct? They were of the ancient language and everything. And you read my mind, Justin, because I was going to ask you about, is the goal of what we're doing now the right goal? Because you hear it all the time. I want to live to 180, right? Yeah. So I'm going to, genetically modify myself to do that, get rid of all disease, kind of this and that. Whereas no one's really looking at the quality of life almost. To say those years 180, great. But, where's the happiness factor in this? Yeah. What is your goal? And I really think that health, happiness is the goal here. It shouldn't be about numbers so much, but again, that's difficult to say, because can you have both? Can you be healthy, happy, and live to 180? What do you think?
Why not? I mean, right? Yeah, I think that's the goal, right? Is like live as long as possible, but also be as happy as possible. And I think, on the more like psycho-spiritual side of things within Daoism, the sort of basic principle, something that makes Daoism different than Buddhism. Daoism doesn't believe in karma in the way that Buddhism has this idea: you do well in this life, you come back as something better the next life. You have this sort of upgrading as you go. Daoism doesn't have that judgment, because that's a judgment thing. If you're good, you get something good. If you're bad, you get something bad. Daoism looks at it as you're here to have a purpose. You're here to learn something for the sake of your soul, for your unique person. They would argue that like you and I both share an interest in the health of the world, the health of people. That's part of our journey. For whatever reason, we were both drawn into that field. And we may suffer from disease, or we may never suffer from disease, but we are surrounded by disease either way, constantly. And so disease is a big part of our life journey. And the goal is to learn, why am I here? Because all of us, whether we live to be 100, 80, 60, 200, we're going to die. And so at that last moment when we die, can we die peacefully? Can we let go and feel we lived the life that we were meant to without having regrets that call us back to have to redo something? And I think if we look at living longer without also including living more complete so that we can die peacefully, then no matter what, we're going to reach the end of days and still die unhappy.
Right.
Like we have to, in theory, you want to live every day as though it were your last. That's the sort of classic statement, right? And if you can live like that for 180 years, then you can have that much more rich experience and enjoy it that much more. But if you live to be 180 and you never really figure out why you're here, you're going to die just as unhappily as you would have if you died at 60 or 40 or 20 or whatever.
Right. And I feel like a lot of what's going on there, whether it's hacking or just whether it's living our lives, we kind of are we're reaching for goals that I think are quantitative but don't give us so much happiness. And as soon as we reach them, we reach for something else and we keep doing that. We're running this hamster wheel and we're never truly happy. We're thinking we're getting to happy. And that once I take this corner and inject this new compound, I'll feel better and it'll do this and I won't have this. And we just never really get there. And at the end of our days, however long, 180 or, 76, the average now, we kind of look back and say, was that truly happy? And, some people may be able to be content with that. I don't know. I can't answer that because I've never had that experience. But I think the goal, again, is a little bit off. When I go on social media and I see people just posting these things on there, and it does seem like a game of just numbers and things that are fleeting, and then you just keep going, right? And I think that's unhealthy, though. That's what I'm trying to get at, is these actions, as healthy as we see them, meaning lifting this much, getting this much body weight off you, doing these numbers, at the end of the day, if you're not happy, that's not healthy for you, I believe.
Yeah, I
agree with that. That we should change our metrics somewhat from this quantifiable self to the happiness quality factor.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to include both, right? It's like we need to. Some of those details that are quantifiable are important, and they're also not the answer. Living to 180 is not the answer to happiness. Living to 181 is not the answer to happiness. Living to 182 is not the answer to happiness. Like somebody will reach 110, then their goal will be 115, then it will be 120. And it's the non-reachable destination that we lose track of actually the journey, right?
Yes. And in some way that causes suffering. In some way that can be almost an initiating factor to disease and to a shortened life, right?
Absolutely.
That's the paradox of it.
Argue that. Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some of the ways we can increase both the quality of happiness of a life and both the longevity in there and basically preserve our health? Because you're dealing with so much from East, West, modern, ancient. What are some of the things you've noted? And of course, I understand it's kind of probably going to be tying them all together and seeing who the person is. But is there something now that you're seeing as a trend maybe within what your work does that is starting to show, well, more people are showing that this is improving their quality of life where we are right now, or this?
Most of my work the last, let's say, 15 years has been with autoimmune disease and cancers and those sorts of things. And I would say, a very small number of those people had some form of toxic exposure that overwhelmed the system and led to a sort of disease state. But the majority had other stuff that they didn't resolve that accumulated in their systems that led to an inflammatory cascade, which led to disease, which led to symptoms, which led them towards me. And almost all of that is psycho-emotional in nature. It's the human journey. And in the Daoist model, we tend to look at the human experience in three layers. The Daoists love trinities, so they're always looking at things in components of threes. But the fundamental of any human experience is survival. Got to eat, got to sleep. You need just the basics of survival. The next level of interaction for a sense of survival or meaning in our life is interaction with other humans. It's connection. It's the idea of community and having relationships with other people. And then the final layer of the human journey is differentiation. I am different than you because we've had relationship. We now know that you specialize in doing this. I specialize in doing that. We share some things in common, but we also recognize that we're different and you are better at certain things. And so I cede my to you because I know you have expertise in certain things, and maybe I'm better at certain things, and your power towards me because I'm better at certain things. And what the West seems to have done is we've gone from survival into this differentiation where it's like we're all individuals. I'm me, I'm different, special, I'm that. And we've lost that middle level of connection. And interesting enough, of course, with the whole lock process because of COVID, need for social connection is that much more amplified. And psychological trauma is all in that level of differentiation, of connection with others. It's how we grow up to become ourselves that causes us to process things in different ways, to lead lifestyles in different ways. And most of the people that I've seen with chronic degenerative diseases have some form of that, where they will have an emotional trigger and then have physical symptoms that respond to the emotional trigger, more than they're eating the wrong foods, or they're constantly being exposed to asbestos over and over again, or to this or that or whatever. There's this need to look at the human journey and allow for the human journey of our emotions that the West seems to have stepped away from. And in Western psychology, we call it shadow work, or the subconscious work that was sort of framed by Jung, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Jungian psychology, who, interestingly enough, was very influenced by Daoism.
Yeah, I read that.
And I think that's an area that we want to take the wisdom of hacking and begin to learn and apply that to our emotional experiences. And I think what we'll find is there isn't a hack for the emotional journey.
Mm-hmm.
There's just the work of really learning to be real with ourselves, to be honest, to call something what it is and be like, oh, I'm angry. Oh, I'm sad. And how do I process this grief, or how do I process this anger, so that I don't carry it around with me for a decade and end up with some sort of symptom that I don't want.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with you here with understanding that emotional disturbances and the emotional baggage we all have is a root cause of a lot of disease. And you see it, I mean, we see it all the time at our practice here, where you can address the physical pretty easily. You know, toxins can be removed, all these things, you know, solvents, everything else, pathogens, or you could target them now. We're very good at that. But when it comes to the emotional, that is difficult. That is because you got to be involved in it, right? There has to be a real acknowledgement that something is there. It's usually deep-seated, right? And it's something that's going to take some time to address. And a lot of people just don't want to. They want to sweep it under the rug. That, you know, relationship problem they had from when they were little with their parents or something, that's difficult to address. That's difficult to even see. Why is that suddenly causing this issue here? That's a physical ailment. How could you say that, right? What have you seen when you've spoken and tried to treat people? How are you getting them to engage this emotional side of healing, which is healing again? I never like it when people say mental health versus real health. It's like, it's all health. Come on. Once you separate it, you're actually making it something separate than your health, I feel like. Health is mental, physical, spiritual. It's all of it. Stop separating these different things. So how are you going about that emotional part with your patients to really get them to change, to address, and to heal?
So in the meditative side of Daoism, which is where you begin, meditation is where we begin to have to sit with ourselves. That's really the kind of the fundamental side of meditation, is not some goal for enlightenment. It's not like sitting in total silence. If anybody who has done meditation knows that when you go sit on the cushion, silence is not what you get.
No.
It's just, I don't know anybody that goes and sits and is like, oh, this was just so peaceful. There's a lot there.
They're lying if they say that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the Daoist model, they have this idea of trinities, of the different body cavities. You have the dantians, the elixir fields. You have the lower one, the middle one, the upper one. And they are different body cavities. So you have the abdominal cavity, the thoracic cavity, the cranial cavity as physical representations, but they represent the idea of the physical, the emotional, the spiritual. And the message as I see it, or as I understand it, is we need to be able to begin our practice as a somatic practice, to inhabit our body, to somatically experience our emotions and see where things are held within the body, so that we give the emotions, the mind, the ego, whatever we want to call that, something to anchor into. That I can ground myself in the midst of experiencing grief, amidst in experiencing stress or anger or fear or whatever it is, that I can feel ground, can contain my experience. But I don't have anywhere safe to go within myself, and the outside world is the trigger for my emotional experience. I'm going to short circuit and go into trauma mode. I will carry away from that some form of PTSD because I can't integrate the experience that I'm having. And if I can't settle my emotions and anchor them into the body, and can't sort of dissolve some of that egoic experience of trauma and the emotions and everything, then I'll never be able to cultivate a transpersonal relation, something beyond me, because I'm always going to be stuck in my egoic story. Mm-hmm. And it's not a shortcoming. That's just the human experience. If I'm just thinking about me, there's no way I can develop a relationship to God, whatever you want to call God, because it's still all about me.
Yeah.
And so what I tend to do with patients is to get them beginning to inhabit their body when they feel their emotions, and just getting them to sort of come back into the physical experience. And what often happens is we tend to be in sort of two spaces with our emotional baggage, if you will. In some cases, it's true shadow, and we don't know that it's there. We know there's something there. I know something happened, but I'm not really sure what it is or what happened. And so I need to open Pandora's box. I need to bring my history out of the closet so I can really look at what's there. In other cases where people are coming in with more active PTSD or anxiety or heightened emotional triggers, we know what's there, but it's just too much for us to sit with. Sitting with that old memory is too painful. It's too intense. It's too charged. It's too big, if you will. Then we have herbal medicine that can be used to help shrink that monster, to make it so that the intensity is not a volume 10, it's a volume 7, versus giving you a medicine to make you numb to the experience, but then you can never really work with it. And it's really I would argue, one of the shortcomings of the Western medical approach to pain, whether that's physical pain or emotional pain, is that sometimes we think the goal is to have pain. Mm-hmm. But the goal of pain for physical pain was not to make the pain go away. It was to lower the pain just enough that you could work with it to do your rehab, and then eventually not need the pain medicine. And the same should be done for psychological medicine. Mm. The pharmaceuticals that are used are meant to take away your depression, take away your anxiety, rather than simply reducing it just enough that you can begin to unravel it yourself and eventually not need the medicine.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good parable for how I know I feel and many doctors feel about pharmaceutical intervention. Mm-hmm. A lot of people out there think if you're in alternative medicine world that you're against big pharma. Mm-hmm. I think pharmaceutical drugs are incredibly important. I just think that they are not the end all. They are not the go-to, and they should not be the rest of your life. You are going to use this and more and another as you go, and your quality of life will continue to deteriorate just a little bit slower, maybe, right? I think that's the problem, and I think you have to address it with a reasonable approach of saying, yes, they are absolutely necessary, and yes, go on them, if you need it. Absolutely. If you're in a traumatic state, go on pharmaceutical drugs. But like you said, give yourself a time where you're going to be able to cope with it, and then do something about it, and then heal, right? Yeah. That's the big crutch with it.
In classical herbal medicine, the very first book of Chinese herbal medicine is called Shen Nong's Materia Medica. Shen Nong's a historical figure, an imaginary figure who ate the plant medicines, looked inside of his stomach, saw what it was doing, and then compiled a book about here is how medicine works. And he divided medicines into 3 categories: lower, middle, and upper grade. And lower grade medicines were the things that were used in lower dosages for shorter amount of times, because if you at a higher dosage or a longer time, they would become toxic. Mm-hmm. They were meant to treat disease acutely when you needed a big gun.
Yeah.
But you couldn't use that big gun forever because it would become poison. Mm-hmm. The middle grade herbs would be the ones to help you rehabilitate. you're not needing the lower grade anymore, but you're not fully better. The system is still not operating smoothly. We need to prime the functioning of the system rather than treating the disease. And then the upper grade ones were the longevity, the telomere enhancing, the ones that if you took them for 20 years, you just lived because you were just doing it as a cultivation to support your health rather than doing it because you felt like you were ill and you needed to do this so that you wouldn't die. And I think that's a model that is really a great way to look at medicine, is like there is a time and place for big gun, powerful, and possibly toxic intervention.
Mm-hmm.
Just absolutely a place that saves lives.
And to me, that just makes sense, right? When you say it like that, it's like, oh yeah, there is a place. It's not like you're saying, no, get rid of all of it and let's never see that or use it again. There's a place for it, but let's be reasonable with it. Let's see it, for what it is, and look at these, as you put it, the three different types of approaches we could go with, and really do this for the betterment of all of us.
And I think, like, if you look at any one of your patients, you can drop them into any one of those three phases, right? Usually patients come to us and they're in more of the acute disease state, and we try to move them into a rehabilitory state. And then we eventually get them to taking care of themselves, where they don't need to see us, but maybe they check in and get a little tune-up here or there with the seasons or once a year or whatever. But it's not, like, patients are not meant to stay in that sick disease state.
They're not meant to, but they are in the conventional model, right? You're just managing their symptom. You're not getting them to self-manage, which is what you're talking about getting people back into. Once you can start doing that yourself and you don't need those acute type medication, you're out of that state already. You're in a state to take care of yourself. You're in a state where you're self-healing again, what the body should be doing. Sure, it was out of place and you needed some assistance for that time. But just like you break a bone, you're not going to wear a cast for the rest of your life. You wear it during that acute period where it's really healing, and then you do the rehab, and then you do all the things, and you slowly build it back up. So it's like, you see that everywhere with cuts. It's so funny because when we can visually see it, we get it. When we can't see a disease literally attacking and, every day monitor it with our eyes, it's like, well, no, of course you need drugs for that. So it just boggles my mind sometimes that people see healing in other aspects, like a cut, a broken bone, anything, and then don't apply that to chronic disease.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that concept we would say is the micro-macro. The micro is the broken bone. The micro is the cut. The macro is there's certain phases to healing no matter what. It's a broken bone. And what those micros look like will be different in the speciality. Yeah. But it's still, like, the human body is the human body. Whether we call it Chinese medicine, we call it Western medicine, like, it's still the same package of bones and nerves and flesh and vessels and bioelectric energy or chi or whatever you want to call it. It's still...
so many words there for that, right? Chi, Chak, all these others. And so I wanted to circle back really quickly into that healing trauma, because I do think it's so important. I do want to go over one of the topics that you had discussed in plant medicine microdosing, especially for, shifting the psycho-emotional struggles a lot of us deal with. I had a guest on, Stacy Berman, last time talking about macrodosing mostly, a shamanistic type ritual, medicinal journey with psilocybin or any type of psychoactive, basically, and each one was a little different, she told me, but we didn't really get into microdosing. She didn't really go there. So I want to hear your perspective on microdosing and how you approach it.
Yeah. So my background is in Daoism, which has a long history of ingesting substances to alter perception of reality. And that's really what psychedelics are. There's a whole category of plants in Chinese medicine that are into this category called opening the orifices. They allow us to perceive reality, scent, sight, sound, taste in different ways. And when you take a psychedelic, you perceive reality differently. You step into a different zone, and the difference, I would say, like between microdosing or macrodosing, is that when we macrodose, we give up control, we surrender to the medicine. And this is what can lead to a bad trip if people have a lot of fear around that surrender process. Or if there are other people in the room, if it's a group ceremony, then you have all of this sort of emotional baggage of everybody else in the room that can be a little overwhelming sometimes, which is why who holds that space is very important. And yet it can be very powerful to surrender if you have been wearing the lens of trauma or the lens of depression or the lens of some sort of psychological scar, because you suddenly see the world differently. It gives you the opportunity to realize what I thought my only option is actually not my only option. There are other options there in front of me. And that big shift can be a very life-altering experience for people. It takes us out of that fight, flight, freeze, tunnel vision, and suddenly expands us to there is something else besides this one little thing that we have been encompassed by. Microdosing, on the other hand, is the gradual opening of those orifices. And in the West, microdosing is done with, any number of psychedelics. But in the Daoist model, it would be done with multiple plants. And because Chinese medicine doesn't prescribe individuals, it's always a formula. And so a classic formula, one that I use in my practice, is from a very famous Chinese physician named Sun Zimiao, and it's called the 5 Shen, the 5 roots. It's 5 different plants, all with the name Shen in their name. So it's 5 Shen because they all have that word in their name. And each one of the roots represents a different facet of the psychological journey. And so depending on where a person is at, depending on what part of their journey they are struggling with, you can change the dosage to target their problem versus your problem versus my problem. Because where we're stuck is going to be different because, again, we are all unique. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of microdosing in the Daoist model is to try to help a person unravel where they are stuck versus just taking something so they open their mind to experience reality differently. You can actually make it more targeted. And the way that I was taught to do it, the sort of classical Daoist approach, is you drink the tea and then you do meditation. You do your introspective work. It doesn't have to be any sort of esoteric, fancy meditation. It's that you sit with your own demons, you sit with your own thoughts, you sit with your own traumas after you drink the tea. And it helps process it. It helps you to see it from a different perspective and to interact with it in a different way so that you can hopefully just that experience, get rid of what doesn't serve you, integrate what does serve you, and then move on with your life, which is what emotional experiences are supposed to be. When we can't do that, that's called PTSD, right? We continue the event in the present day, even though it's not there, because we didn't digest it, basically.
So you're using these 5 Shen herbs in a tea to ingest, right? And it sounds like you have to be somewhat skilled and artful with this because you're talking about the combination of 5, right? That's going to be a formula that's going to be very personalized to the individual.
It can be. And when I work with somebody one-on-one, I tend to customize it for them. But I also have 3 blends that I use on my website for the general public that are sort of simplified forms of it. And I do a 3 Shen, 3 herbs. That's where most people end up being stuck. If we look at the first one is for the recurrent stories. So it helps to slow down that skipping record of living the same thing over and over and over again. So that intensity isn't there quite as much, right? We slow the experience down, but we don't. The next herb in that formula is one that drops you into yourself. It helps you to sort of physically embody and be present with yourself because that's the next step that has to happen in the journey. The 3rd herb helps us to begin to separate from that experience, to realize we are not experience that we keep living. We are actually something different from that. But if we don't slow it down and we don't settle into ourselves, we can't disentangle from it because we don't realize we're entangled in it. And then the fourth and fifth herbs are ones that help us to regenerate after we have separated. But I use the 3-Shen with a lot of my patients as a stepping stone for people with big emotional triggers or intense anxiety. And the nice part of Chinese herbs is they're not psychedelic, so you're not going to hallucinate when you take them. They're not illegal. And you're taking a microdose, whereas you might same formula at 6 grams a day or 9 grams a day. For meditation purposes, you might be taking 2 grams a day. You're taking a microdose. And what ends up happening is it has more of a mentally or psychologically calming impact rather than affecting the body on a physical level. When you want to affect the physical tissues, you take a higher dose to make a stronger impact. When you want to affect the more subtle mental body, you take a lower dose as a way to work with that.
Right. Sort of like in homeopathy, the lesser the dose is actually sometimes more powerful on that etheric force and on a different level for the body. And what are the results you're seeing with this microdosing this way as far as the emotional components and healing people?
My general approach is in the language of Chinese medicine, we say that the emotions are stored in the blood. So we think of, even in the West, somebody's hot-blooded or they're cold-blooded. We talk emotions in terms of the blood. And the blood is a cycle of the moon if we look at a woman's menstrual cycle. Mm-hmm. So my general approach is take tea, do your meditation twice a day for a month. And there's not a single person I know who has done that has not transformed their relationship to whatever that trigger is in the course of a month. It doesn't go away because my struggles for being me are going to be my struggles for my life as part of just my journey. But the power of those memories, the power of those experiences changes. It just gets easier. And I think there's something to be said for the consistent practice day in, day out of sitting. And at that point, it makes it very hard to have the sort of double-blinded, placebo-controlled to know exactly what percentage the teas are doing, what percentage the meditation is doing. But I've seen it not help.
Right.
And I think that, again, goes back to the ancient. They wouldn't have done these things if it didn't help, because if it doesn't help, we throw it out. That's in medicine as well. Medicine has to help people. If it doesn't, we get rid of it. It's just patients have to get better. If they don't, you don't keep doing the same thing over and over again.
And this seems like a subtle but a very impactful way to address some of those things, because you're actually having the people, person be responsible. Some of the things, and I converted a little bit on my feelings of using psychedelics in medicine. I think everything is a tool, and of course, like a tool can either be good or bad. It's how you use it. If you want to go to a rave and take a bunch of psychedelics, I don't think that's healthy. Maybe not so, but if you are open to it, if you're ready for it and you're using it in a controlled environment with a practitioner, then, psychedelics can absolutely have some impact. But again, everyone's different. So you don't know that it's going to actually work or not for you.
Yeah. I mean, I can only share, my personal experience with that journey. I came into this through, again, the study of medicine and the study of Daoism. And I found it very curious that there were all these ancient formulas for meditation. And I'm an experimenter. I like experiment on myself, and I like meditation. And so I have this practice of meditation, and I have this practice that was somewhat established, and I brought in a variable of different herbs and saw what that did to my experience. I went through the trauma of a divorce, had a lot of internal judgment, anger, hurt, just normal human stuff that goes through in that period. And it was too much for me to sit with. And so I turned to the medicines that I knew, and I did my meditation and sat with my grief, and I sat with my anger, and I sat with my fear. But I used these teas as part of that journey to work with those emotions, and saw how much it helped me. And I had a meditation practice that did a lot of visualization of light and sort of more esoteric type of stuff. And then I took psychedelics. Many years later, I took mushrooms and had a journey with mushrooms. And it was beautiful, and it was amazing. And it wasn't anything different than I had already seen in my meditation. It was just the volume was louder.
Right.
And so for me, it was an insight into, it's a powerful medicine. It can be a beautiful medicine. And you don't need the medicine to get there. You just need to do the practices. Because again, if we just go back to common sense, why would we be dependent? If there is, like, if psychedelics help us commune with God, or we call it entheogens, communing with God, etc., why can't we get there ourselves? If we are part of this universe, we should be able to get there without the need for those things. Not that they can't help us, but we shouldn't be dependent on it, just like we shouldn't be dependent on medicine. And I think, again, if we can see these things as training tools to help us work through whatever part we are struggling with, we take responsibility, but we also get some help. You know, it's like if you're going to put in a new sprinkler system, you're going to ask some friends to come over and help you dig some of the ditches and lay the piping, and not going to do it all yourself. You're going to be like, oh, this is a lot for me to do on my own. I'm going to get some help with my friends.
Right.
You're going to move, you're going to get some friends to come help you. It's just like, the medicines are just our friends. You have a relationship with them. They are your allies, but you're not dependent on them. At least is the way that I was taught.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still your journey to walk. No one else is going to do it for you. No one's going to heal you. You know, that's what people always, I think, have wrong when they say, oh, the doctor will fix me. No, he won't. You know, that vaccine also won't actually heal you. It'll just help your immune system, hopefully. Right. So all of these things people think, oh, that's healing. Like, you are the only person that heals you. And it's your journey, your responsibility, your experience, all of that. How you get there is always different, but don't expect that, you know, ingesting an herb or taking any medicine will suddenly do it for you. It'll act as a catalyst, maybe, sure.
Yeah.
But you're still going to have to put in the work, right?
Yeah. And I think that might be one of the critiques I have of the sort of the current movement to microdosing, which is very popular. Is that it's like, oh, I'm just going to take this microdose of LSD or of psilocybin or of MDMA or of whatever, and that's going to do everything. Well, that's really no different than any other medical model where you're handing over your intrinsic power to the medicine, saying that I don't have the ability to do this myself. This is just going to fix it all for me. I don't have to participate.
Do you think that's a trend across the board? Meaning, I'm seeing that also, and I get a little frustrated at it too, because I've been around medicine my whole life, and my father, I've traveled all over the world, and I have a very unique kind of perspective, just like yours. And a lot of what people are doing are trying to find, it's CBD. That's going to solve all my pain right there. All I do is take it. Or it's marijuana, or it's this peptide, or it's like, stop just going after the one thing that's hot right now in the news and actually put in the work. And yes, I'm not saying don't use that, but I'm also saying that is not your holy grail or panacea to everything.
Yeah, as soon as you start looking for that panacea, this is going to solve everything, you've missed it. And the Tao Te Ching, the sort of hallmark book of Taoism, right? The Tao Te Ching or Tao Te Ching, chapter 1, that which you call the eternal Tao is not the eternal Tao. Once you call something your panacea, it's not your panacea. Like, you just, once you say this is it,
you screwed it, right? Yeah, that's it.
It's just like, it's not how it works. It's just, there isn't anything in the world. It's stepping out of the esoteric of Taoism, just stepping into Western science. There's nothing in the world that is that.
Yeah. And I mean,
found.
Yeah, and that freaks people out, I think, but I think it's a beautiful thing, because it means we all have our own ways to get there, and it's going to be a nice long journey, because if the panacea was, it would just be over, basically. You know, we'd all be like, oh, that's it. We're all rich, beautiful, healthy, whatever it is, and that's the end of it. And I think we'd be absolutely miserable, and I think we'd get sick because of that.
Yeah,
so
we would, totally. Yeah.
I think we need to stop looking for a cure, the cure, whatever, the panacea, the next big thing that's going to do everything. Yeah. Be very open to whatever it is, but understand it's still a journey. It's still this up and down is all part of it, but just enjoy it. Be happy. You know, that's more healthy than anything.
And the happiest people I know are the people that are happy with the idea that it's a journey.
Yes. Very true.
the people that are so tunnel vision focused on a specific unmovable destination are usually the people that are the most unhappy. The world has to be this way. I need this to occur in this exact way, and I have zero flexibility. This is the only way that my health will be perfect. This is the only way that my life will be perfect. This is the only... It's just, those are the most miserable people.
Yeah.
My life has struggles. I'm sure your life has struggles. We have ups and downs. It's part of the human journey. And yet overall, I'm a pretty happy person. Even though there are things that frustrate me or scare me, as like what's happening now in the country, I have a ton of judgment around what is happening and what should be happening, and a lot of fear and all of that, but I'm still a happy person.
Yeah.
You know, and it's part of me. Like we lean into the good and the bad, we're kind of screwed. Right.
And I mean, that's the thing. There's a polarity to everything. That is a law of polarity, right? You cannot have good without bad. You can't have health without disease. You can't have hot with cold, you know? So we have to embrace that in some ways and always see the positive and enjoy the journey, as you said, somewhat. You're going, the funny thing is that I've met so many patients with some serious diagnoses that were absolutely, you know, their life could have been over right now, but they look back on those points, those you know, that diagnosis, that suffering, and are able to say it's one of the best blessings I've had. It made me appreciate life. It's made me a much happier person. I'm doing things now that I probably wouldn't have done ever, that are truly my purpose now, and I'm so happy. And it's like, wow, that's great, because you saw something so negative and it turned out to really be a positive in your journey.
Which is the journey of the alchemist.
Yes.
To transform poison into medicine. Right.
Speaking of alchemy, I heard you are into spagyric medicine. Is that right?
Well, that's the ancient Daoist approach. Is like, how do you take something that's poisonous and make it medicine? So spagyrics is the Western approach.
It's the westernized approach, because I, studied, Paracelsus' work, and we actually distributed products for a company named Soluna, Sol, Luna, Sun, Moon, out of Germany. Nice. That was based on Paracelsian philosophy and everything. And it is fascinating, right?
It is. It's very, very cool stuff of like, how do we do this? And it's interesting. The Daoists, most of their intense alchemical work was with heavy metal, arsenic, mercury, and a lot of that information was lost. The processing of how to make use of cinnabar, of orpiment, of realgar, in ways that you could ingest it and use it for psycho-spiritual growth. The processing methods were lost. It survived in Vedic medicine. And so in India, you have Rasa Shastra, which is the ancient processing of many different minerals, many different substances, but including these very toxic heavy metals that are safe for ingestion. And it's interesting because those substances in that alchemy, part of what makes them toxic is how they cross the blood-brain barrier. But maybe if they're processed properly, they can cross the blood-brain barrier, actually therapeutic. And of course, we know that in the treatment of disease, getting herbal medicine, getting supplements, or getting pharmaceuticals to cross that barrier is one of the bigger challenges. Absolutely.
And it's crazy how people thousands of years ago, again, the ancients, were able to do these things, right? Things that we're still trying to do now, and looking at neuropeptides and nanoparticle and all these different things, right? And they did this. They did this 1,000 years ago. And anyone listening, if you want to jump in a cool rabbit hole, look into alchemical medicine, spagyric medicine, as it's called in the West. But I mean, there's so much there that you could start to, just learn about. And even then going into anthroposophy and Steiner's work and others. And it does lead you. For me, it was like an opening into so much more, into understanding the importance of the spiritual aspect of life, of health and healing as well, psycho-emotional, why us just staring at the physical and biochemistry is just not enough. And that is showing, right? It's showing in medicine right now. If you only go that route, well, you're going to have problems because you're never going to truly heal.
Yeah, that's my argument against going down those rabbit holes of specialization is, do we want to go deep into understanding the chemistry of how something affects the body? Yes, but we need to take that information that we discover and reintegrate that knowledge back into looking at the whole person. That if we just look at it for like, oh, I think this, it's going to affect this one pathway, which will affect this one part, and we don't look at the rest of the human experience, we've missed it. It's just, it has to circle back and be reintegrated into the whole.
Yeah.
You can go specialize, but you have to back, because there's no way to set out your emotional experience from your physical experience. Nobody has succeeded in doing that, because it's not possible.
Right.
Because you're not a robot.
And we get that better viewpoint of everything when we're able to go microscopic at times into these things, but always go back. I think that's the alchemical process of evolution, right? You always kind of go in and out. And each time you do that, there is a transformation, almost a transmutation that goes better. So if we're able to go in and look at something like epigenetics and, really studied it, but then step all the way back out and look at all of these things and apply it as a whole in this holistic macrocosmic approach, that's where you see this transmutation and this evolution towards something better. And you keep doing that. You go further down the rabbit hole, but then you step all the way back out, right?
Yeah. That's the Daoist model.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any books that you could recommend, either on Daoism or anything we spoke about here that kind of resonated with you?
Tao Te Ching itself as a book is not an easy read. It's pretty esoteric, worth reading, but a bit of a tough one. Ken Cohen is a well-written author teacher. He has several books on Daoism that are probably a very good introduction to the general worldview of Daoism as a starting point. Again, my specialty is from within the medical paradigm as a physical health, emotional health, not the sort of religious chants and scriptures and rituals and all that sort of stuff. And classical Taoists have practices, physical health practices, medical health practices, astrology, looking at somebody's chart, the birth chart, the study of the scripture and the rituals and all that sort of stuff. And then also people that would study feng shui and the medicine land and the buildings and that sort of stuff. So people can study Taoism from any one of those branches and still be a Taoist, if you will, and not have done some of the other ones. But for most of us in the West, the sort of general philosophy side of things, of how to look at life and have a broader view, I think Ken Cohen's books are a good starting point.
Yeah, very nice. And I hope people go and read that, because this type of approach, I feel like it's getting lost a little bit, this understanding of being in the gray, of macrocosmic, of stepping back, of not being right or wrong, but kind of appreciating all sides of the story, even ones that may go against your belief system that you have ingrained since you were little. I think that's a beautiful thing, is to challenge yourself in those belief systems, because a lot of times those are just programs that are incorrect, right? They're stuck in our brains and our subconscious, and we need to break them down sometimes to open up, to allow things to happen.
And there's always a different perspective to everything. Always two sides to something. And the Chi symbol, the yin yang tool, the Taiji tool, that white and black spiral with the little dot inside each of one, shows that the extreme of the white has the black circle inside of it, and the extreme of the black has the white circle within it. So even at its utmost, its opposite is always there. So even at the darkest period, there is a ray of light. And even at the brightest period, there is a sign of darkness coming. The sun goes up in the sky, it goes back down. As soon as it gets to the dark night, it's to rise again. It's never stays static, only bad, only good. There's always this transformation. And even now with what's happening in the country, whatever side of the political fence, people on had a conversation with a patient today, who was very concerned with the status of politics in the country and the election coming up and the good and the bad of Trump and all of this sort of stuff. And I said, well, I think, from my perspective, try to look both sides of it. And that is that there is a lot of waking up that is happening. There's a lot of discussion around issues that are very important, and also a lot of pain that's happening. It's not good. It's not bad. There is good. There is bad. But both are there, irregardless of whatever side of the fence you're on. You could say that if you're on the pro-Trump, you could say there was all this that was pre-existing before him, and he is bringing good to balance out that bad. If you're saying that he's bad, then there is the good that's coming to balance him out. But I think there's always the duality is there. The good and the bad are always there, and we have to be willing to accept that truth. We don't find some sort of cohesiveness to move forward. We just stay in our polarity and argue with each other and shout and then go nuts.
Yeah. And it's a really important message there in it, because we are in these times, whether it's politics, whether it's coronavirus, whether it's just healthcare or anything, you're seeing more of this. You're seeing the polarity, which again, polarity in itself is a good thing. I mean, we need it to survive, right? Our cells need polarity to bring things out and pull them out, and everything is in polarity. But it's when we radicalize it and only stay in one and don't allow the shifting and the flow. It's almost like the chi gets stopped. Energy just stops right there. And then there's a closed-mindedness almost of it all, which is never a good thing, never a good. And it's difficult, I understand, but it's also a wonderful lesson for those people, I feel like, is to open up, is to listen, is to kind of, shift perspective a little bit.
Yeah, to try and just see what the other side is. See the good in what you think is bad. See the bad in what you think is good. Just as your own exercise, whatever side of the fence you're on, just see the good of what you think is bad. See the bad of what you think is good. Just try to keep your mind open. So you don't get locked into one reality. One of my neighbors just started trimming a tree. I don't know if you hear in the background.
It's not that bad. I mean, maybe when they get up to your window. No, it's all right. Okay. No, I mean, these are really important messages. Thank you so much for sharing them. But where can people learn more about you, your work, get in touch with you?
Website is the place to find me, which is my name, justinehrlich.com. And I've got some blog posts up there. I've got some guided meditations on Insight Timer. I've got an exercise pamphlet that is for helping people to unpack their own story, to look at their layer program, see where they might be leading to disease that they are experiencing currently, whether that be a physical, emotional struggle. So that's the best place. I have the meditation teaser there as well, if that's something people are interested in exploring, the Daoist, the microdosing. There's information there about that as well.
Yeah, go check that out, because I love these topics of discussion, Justin. So thank you. And I hope the audience really enjoyed it. These are kind of the macro and micro topics we need to have. We need to be talking about these pieces and bringing this I think, alternate discussion to light in some ways, because everyone is getting so polarized again in what they're talking about, when maybe the answer to all of this is to step back, to appreciate the diversity of everything and see things from that 30,000 foot view and apply it along our journey towards healing and happiness.